They never wanted you to hear this. Not the police, not the press, not the men in the suits who sealed the case files and fed the public scraps of fear. What I'm about to tell you is not just a story of murder. It is a story of control, of how terror itself can be weaponized, injected like poison into the bloodstream of a nation, until people no longer see clearly, only shadows. It begins in the late 1960s. California, a land of sunlit dreams and counterculture rebellion. But beneath the surface, something darker was taking root. A predator who would not only kill his victims, but hijack the minds of millions. He called himself the Zodiac, a phantom who taunted police with letters, who turned newspapers into his personal stage, and who draped his crimes in puzzles so intricate that even the brightest cryptographers stumbled in confusion. And here's the truth. No one tells you it wasn't just about murder. Murder was only the medium. His real weapon was fear. Controlled, orchestrated fear. Every headline that screamed his name, every family that locked their doors at night, every code that dangled like forbidden fruit in front of the public, all of it was part of a system, a psychological control system. Do you see? This was never about random violence. This was ritual, design, a hidden architecture of manipulation. Think about it. Why does a killer beg for attention? Why does he write letters to the press, demand they be printed, threaten mass death if they are ignored? Because the act of killing was never enough. He needed audience. He needed you. And in that moment, America became his stage. The Zodiac wasn't just killing people in California. He was rewiring the mind of a nation. He turned trust into paranoia. Lovers in parked cars became symbols of vulnerability. Every stranger became a suspect. Every unsolved line of code was a hook buried deeper into the psyche. This was not chaos. This was orchestration. And if you think it was just one man playing a twisted game, you're already falling for the lie. Because once you pull back the curtain, the Zodiac's mask reveals something older, something more sinister. A system that predates him, a system that still watches you. Are you ready to see what hides in the dark? You've been told the Zodiac Killer was just a lone madman, that he was an anomaly, a glitch in the system. But that's the kind of lie institutions feed you when the truth is too dangerous to face. Look closer. Really look. Every time the Zodiac wrote a letter, the press obeyed. Newspapers printed his words like scripture. Every time he demanded attention, the police bent to his game. Entire departments shifted their resources at his command. Who was in control? Not the authorities, not the so-called protectors. It was him. But here's the darker question no one wants to ask. How does one man gain that kind of power? How does a faceless killer bend entire cities to his will? Unless he wasn't truly alone. Unless the mask of the Zodiac was bigger than one face. Consider this. In his letters, the Zodiac spoke in riddles, in symbols, in ciphers. Language that echoes the esoteric traditions of secret societies, ancient cults, and intelligence operations. He didn't just want to frighten. He wanted to initiate, to test, to lure minds into the labyrinth. Every unsolved code wasn't just a puzzle, it was a gate. And every man who stared too long into those symbols was unknowingly stepping into a ritual of control. And what about the timing? The 1960s were an era of experiments on minds, on masses, on consciousness itself. Governments tested drugs, psychology, propaganda. The line between entertainment and indoctrination blurred. Is it so far-fetched to wonder if the Zodiac was more than a man? Could he have been a weaponized story, a controlled burn of fear to study how quickly society unravels when the right lever is pulled? Think about it. A killer who never gets caught. A mystery that never gets solved. A case that drags on for decades, feeding endless speculation. That is not failure. That is design. An open wound that never heals. A ghost that never stops whispering. And so the question becomes, who benefits from the mask of the Zodiac never being removed? Who gains power when fear itself is immortalized? The truth is this: every society needs its shadows, and sometimes those shadows wear human faces. The Zodiac was not just a man, he was a mask. And masks can be worn again and again and again. The deeper you go, the more you'll realize the real killer isn't in the police sketches. The real killer is the sigh. What if I told you fear is not just an emotion? It is an architecture, a structure you live inside every single day, built brick by hands you will never see. The Zodiac understood this, or at least the force behind the Zodiac did. He didn't need to kill hundreds. He killed just enough to seed a legend, then let fear do the rest. Because fear multiplies itself. It breeds in silence. It grows in imagination. And soon, people no longer need the killer to strike. They do the work themselves, looking over their shoulders, locking their doors, spreading whispers, raising children on cautionary tales. That it is the genius of institutional fear. You plant the seed once, and it grows for generations. Ask yourself this: why was the Zodiac never caught? You think with all the manpower, all the technology, all the resources, they couldn't pin him down? Or was it more useful to let the mask linger, to let the mystery metastasize, to ensure that every time people hear the word Zodiac, they feel the old tightening in their chest? Because here's the secret most men never learn. Fear controls more effectively than chains. You don't need to imprison a man if he polices his own mind. You don't need to control a population if they willingly cage themselves in paranoia. This is where the rabbit hole deepens. The Zodiac wasn't just killing strangers on dark roads. He was rewriting trust itself. Lovers could no longer sit beneath the stars without thinking of headlights in the distance. Strangers could no longer offer kindness without suspicion. Even the letters themselves carried poison. The idea that danger could arrive in the morning paper, written in ink, that outlasted bullets, and that poison didn't die with him. It never dies. Institutions learned from it, studied it, replicated it. The Zodiac was a prototype of modern fear culture, a reminder that the most efficient weapon is not the gun, not the knife, not even the bomb, but the mind infected with dread. Look around you now. Headlines, broadcasts, screens glowing in the night. Tell me, do you think fear stopped with the Zodiac? Or do you see his fingerprints on the world you inhabit today? The mask never left. It just grew bigger. Do you think the Zodiac worked alone? He didn't. His greatest accomplice didn't carry a gun, or a knife, or a cipher. His accomplice carried a printing press. The media, the endless churning machine of words and images. They were supposed to inform, but instead, they performed. They took his letters and projected them onto the walls of America's imagination. They gave him what he craved most: an audience. Think about it. Every demand he made, they fulfilled. Print this letter, or I will kill again. And the papers obeyed. They didn't resist. They didn't starve him of attention. They fed him, magnified him, baptized him in ink, and broadcast. The more they covered him, the bigger he became. The more he killed, the more they printed. But here's the hidden truth. This wasn't just negligence. It was profitable. Fear sells. Circulation spiked. People bought papers just to see his ciphers, just to read his threats. Fear became currency, and every murder was converted into headlines, into sales, into power. Now stop and ask yourself, what happens when murder becomes entertainment? What happens when the suffering of victims becomes a spectacle, a theater in which the killer and the media dance together, each feeding the other's hunger? This is the blueprint that never stopped. You see it now, mass shootings, atrocities, horrors splashed across your screens. Every time the killer's name becomes immortal. Every time the act of terror becomes global theater. And the cycle repeats. The media pretends to condemn, but secretly they profit. They pretend to mourn, but secretly they amplify. The Zodiac understood that before anyone else. He used the press not just as a messenger, but as a megaphone. He made himself immortal through their ink. He infected the American psyche so deeply that 50 years later, we are still speaking his name. That is not failure. That is victory. And so, here is the question you must face. Who is more dangerous? The man who pulls the trigger, or the institution that turns his violence into myth? Who is the real Zodiac? The killer in the shadows, or the system that fed on his legend like a parasite? The truth is, every time you repeat his name, you are participating in the ritual. Every time you whisper Zodiac, you are feeding the mask, giving life to the ghost. And that ghost is not done with you yet. The world was told that the Zodiac's ciphers were just games, puzzles from a deranged mind, random letters meant to taunt the police. That's the official story. But if you've studied power long enough, you know better. Symbols are never random. Codes are never meaningless. They are tools. They are gates. They are binding rituals hidden in plain sight. Think of it. 4 ciphers, some solved, some still cloaked in mystery. A mixture of letters, symbols, and patterns that draw the eye, consume the mind, and trap the curious in endless circles. People have lost years of their lives trying to crack them. Whole communities of amateur codebreakers have given themselves willingly to the Zodiac's maze. And in that obsession, something happens. Control. He owned them without ever meeting them. That is psychological warfare. But deeper still, his choice of symbols echoes the occult, the esoteric. Circles, crosses, intersecting lines, the very symbol he signed his letters with, the cross within the circle, is not his invention. It is ancient. You find it carved into stone, drawn in secret texts, invoked in rituals of both power and death. He was pulling from an archetype older than America, older than Christianity, older than law. A symbol meant to signify dominance over the physical and the spiritual. The 4 directions, the binding of heaven and earth. Do you see now? His killings were only the surface layer. The true ritual was language. He turned ordinary men into participants without their consent. When you stare into his ciphers, when you try to decode his message, you step into his circle. You play his game. You kneel, without realizing it, at the altar of his design. And here's the forbidden truth. Symbols do not need to be solved to work. Their power lies in obsession, in repetition, in imprinting themselves into the mind until they live there rent-free. That's why the Zodiac remains immortal. Not because of blood spilled, but because of symbols burned into consciousness. Ask yourself this: why have some of his ciphers never been solved, even with today's technology? Is it incompetence or intention? Was the point never to decode, but to entrap? The deeper you go, the clearer it becomes. His codes were never just puzzles. They were spells. And the more you look at them, the more you realize spells do not fade. They wait. Do you really think the Zodiac existed in a vacuum? That one man alone, without backing, without influence, without deeper currents, could so precisely weaponize fear and symbols? No, he was not an accident of history. He was part of a pattern. The late 1960s, America was a laboratory. Behind closed doors, agencies were running experiments on the mind itself. Projects whispered under acronyms: MK Ultra, Artichoke, Bluebird. Government-funded attempts to rewrite human consciousness through hypnosis, drugs, symbols, and fear. Entire cities became unknowing test subjects. College students, prisoners, soldiers, all fed into the machine of control. And then, in the middle of it all, appears a killer who doesn't just kill, but encodes, who doesn't just murder, but broadcasts his acts through symbols, riddles, and demands. A killer who understands, instinctively or by design, that the human mind is more vulnerable to suggestion when it is wrapped in terror. Ask yourself, was the Zodiac only hunting people on dark roads? Or was he also testing mass psychology, measuring how far fear could spread, how long it could live, how many minds it could capture? Was he a lone predator, or part of something larger, a weaponized phantom serving hidden masters? Because here is the forbidden truth. Every time you hear his story, every time you see his symbol, you are part of the experiment. The control system doesn't need you to believe it. It only needs you to look. And so, here is where the descent shifts, from listening to participating. Right now, I want you to do something dangerous, something symbolic. Go to the comments and write this phrase twice. I see through the mask. Why twice? Because repetition imprints identity. Writing it once is curiosity. Writing it twice is initiation. This is how you lock in awareness, how you mark yourself as someone who no longer stands at this face, but who has stepped deeper into the labyrinth. And remember, algorithms watch comments the way priests once watched prayers. They decide which voices rise, which messages spread, which knowledge survives. By writing that phrase, you're not just declaring who you are, you're bending the system itself. This is how transformation begins. Not in silence, not in fear, but in choosing to see through the mask. The question is, once you see, can you ever unsee? Here is the most dangerous truth of all. The Zodiac wasn't just elusive, he was protected. Think of it. Dozens of letters, codes, eyewitness reports, police sketches, physical evidence, yet decade after decade, nothing. Not one conviction, not one face brought to justice. You are told this is incompetence. You are told this is bad luck. But when you study history, you learn a darker law. When evidence vanishes, it is because someone wanted it gone. Look closely at the case files, reports missing, witness accounts conflicting, leads ignored, names redacted. How many times have we seen this before? In assassinations, in scandals, in crimes that touch the edges of power. The trail doesn't vanish. It is erased. Do you remember when the Zodiac threatened to shoot schoolchildren from a bus if his words weren't printed? Entire districts were paralyzed. Police were deployed. Yet somehow, no coordinated nationwide hunt ever materialized. Why? Why does a man who terrorized millions never face the full weight of the system? Unless the system itself needs him. Fear is leverage. Fear is justification. Fear makes budgets grow, agencies expand, power centralize. Every new ghost in the headlines gives the state a reason to tighten its grip. And what better ghost than one that can never be caught? A phantom always lurking, always threatening, always useful, and so the evidence vanishes, piece by piece. Suspects rise, then fade. Names appear, then dissolve. The truth is drowned under waves of speculation, endless documentaries, recycled theories. Confusion itself becomes the shield. The longer the case remains unsolved, the stronger the myth becomes. Do you see it yet? This isn't failure, it's theater. The Zodiac's mask was not removed because the mask itself was valuable, too valuable to destroy. And so the killer remains in the shadows, not just as a man, but as a symbol protected by silence, curated by omission. A weaponized ghost, half criminal, half construct, preserved by those who understand that mystery is far more powerful than closure. This is how the system works, not by solving, by sustaining, not by removing the darkness, but by keeping it alive, just enough to haunt you. And here you are, 50 years later, still trapped in their design, still whispering his name, still feeding the ghost. Tell me, do you think that's an accident? Or do you see the hand behind the curtain? Do you think the Zodiac was new? Do you think he invented fear as ritual or codes as control? No. He was only an echo, a modern mask for an ancient pattern. For as long as men have sought power, fear has been the altar. In ancient empires, rulers staged blood sacrifices before the eyes of the people, not because the gods demanded it, but because fear kept the people bound. The sight of blood spilling in the temple square reminded them that their lives were not their own. Their safety depended on obedience. Their silence ensured survival. Look at the Aztec priests who carved hearts beneath the sun. Look at Rome's gladiatorial games, where death was spectacle and fear disguised as entertainment. Look at medieval Europe, where heretics burned in the public square, flames licking the sky as sermons thundered. Do you see the pattern? Violence staged not only to kill, but to remind. Ritualized horror as architecture of control. The Zodiac was not an outlier. He was an inheritor, a whisper of the same ancient corruption dressed in modern clothes. His letters were proclamations. His symbols were sigils. His murders were sacrifices staged beneath the neon lights of California, just as once they were staged beneath temple stones. And just as rulers of old allowed rituals of blood to echo through their cities, modern institutions allowed the Zodiac to echo through theirs. He became a priest of fear, and the media his temple choir. Each letter he sent was a liturgy of terror, published and repeated. Each cipher was an incantation, drawing minds into obsession. Each murder was not just a crime, it was an offering. But here lies the forbidden revelation. The real sacrifice was not the bodies of his victims. The real sacrifice was your trust. Trust in strangers. Trust in safety. Trust in institutions. He carved it out of the American psyche, the way ancient priests carved hearts from living chests. And that wound never healed. Do you see now why the mask was never lifted? Why the system let the ghosts survive? Because the ritual worked. The people remembered. The people obeyed. The people feared. And history shows us one thing with absolute clarity. Where fear becomes ritual, control becomes eternal. The Zodiac may have been one man, or one mask, but the system he embodied, that lives on, because institutions have always known what he proved. Fear is the most renewable resource on Earth. Think about it. Governments rise and fall, but what do they all share? They build their power on fear. Fear of invasion, fear of the outsider, fear of collapse. They create enemies in the dark, whispering threats that demand armies, taxes, obedience. And when the enemy fades, they invent a new one. Because fear is the lever that keeps the machine turning. Religions do the same. Eternal damnation, wrath of the gods, holy wars justified not by love, but by fear of punishment, fear of rejection, fear of burning in an afterlife you cannot prove or escape. Do this, believe this, obey this, or suffer forever. The same script, century after century. And now, look at corporations. Advertisements whisper, "You are never enough, never safe, never complete, unless you buy what they offer." Fear of aging, fear of weakness, fear of poverty, fear of irrelevance. They infect you with dread and then sell you the antidote, the cure for a disease they created in your mind. Do you see the pattern yet? The Zodiac was only a small-scale rehearsal of a much larger play. He terrified a state. They terrify the world. He coded fear into letters. They code fear into policy, into doctrine, into glowing screens you carry in your pocket. His symbol was a cross inside a circle. Theirs are flags, logos, brands, symbols you worship without even realizing it. The institutions don't need to kill you to own you. They only need you to feel the possibility of death, loss, or failure. That sensation alone chains you tighter than iron, because when men are afraid, they don't resist. They comply. And here's the most dangerous truth. Once fear becomes profitable, it never dies. Just like the Zodiac, the system doesn't know to solve the terror. It needs to sustain it, keep it alive, keep it whispering, keep it feeding. And so, century after century, mask after mask, the same machine grows, not to protect you, not to guide you, but to consume you. Tell me, do you still think the Zodiac was just one man? Or do you see now that he was a mirror, held up to show you the world you actually live in? Every great mystery has two layers, what is revealed and what is hidden. The Zodiac case is no different. On the surface, you see the ciphers, the letters, the police sketches. You see the open wounds, but beneath that surface lies a silence far more disturbing, the silence of missing records. Why were entire case files sealed away for decades? Why were leads dismissed with no explanation? Why did potential suspects die quietly, their names erased from public memory? You are told it was inconclusive, circumstantial, irrelevant. But patterns like this don't happen by chance. They happen when someone decides that certain truths are too dangerous to reach the public eye. Consider this. Countless witnesses came forward, claiming knowledge, pointing fingers, describing faces. And yet, time and time again, their testimonies dissolved into nothing. Voices muted, contradictions ignored. Dozens of suspects rose and fell, none ever fully examined. The deeper you dig, the more it feels less like a failed investigation, and more like a controlled one. And here is where the silence grows louder. Pieces of evidence lost, handwriting samples destroyed, reports of fingerprints, of hair fibers, of confessions, all gone. Ask yourself, how often does this happen in cases where the accused is a nobody? Evidence vanishes when the truth threatens somebody powerful, or when the mask itself is too valuable to tear away. Maybe the Zodiac wasn't just a man. Maybe he was a tool, a vessel, a cover story for something darker moving in the shadows. Perhaps the killings were real, but the story built around them was cultivated, manipulated, weaponized. And what couldn't be controlled was buried. This is the machinery of suppression. Not every secret is burned. Many are simply locked away in basements, behind redacted pages, inside classified archives that only a select few will ever see. That is how history is shaped, not just by what is written, but by what is erased. The danger is not the killer we can see. The danger is the silence surrounding the one we cannot. And if silence itself becomes the shield, what truth lies so deep, so forbidden, that entire institutions bend themselves to keep it hidden from you? The answer waits in the shadows, but only for those who dare to keep walking into the dark.